employee information, customer information, partner information is as important, if not more important, than your intellectual property or your trade secrets. And unless and until an organization gets that, when they get got, and unfortunately it's going to happen, you're going to be even in more trouble than you would have been in if you were able to demonstrate to regulators and, of course, the other regulators of the American economic system, class action lawsuit attorneys, that in fact you did everything that you could do. Because, in truth, as Carol said, breaches have become the third certainty of life. And contemplate this. In the past few years, over 1 billion, now think of Dr. Evil, pinky to the lips, billion files containing personal identifying information have been exposed to people who should not have had that access, shouldn't have had it. That the barbarians aren't at the gate, they're now in the living room, in our computers, in our mobile devices. So as a result, we are in a war. We're in a war against an enemy that is fully weaponized, enthusiastic, persistent, and creative. And we have to face this every day and act accordingly every day. So one of the most important things, if you're creating a corporate culture that gets it, that gets security and privacy, you've got to emphasize ownership to the company employees. It's a state of mind. It's something that requires upkeep and vigilance to protect what's yours. This is my area. I'm in charge of this. And my area could actually create a disaster for my company. So I'm going to do my part. That's the concept. And ownership creates security. And fostering a sense of ownership among employees is a trickle-down process. Now, I know in the politics that we're hearing about, everybody panics when they hear about trickle-down, but this is one thing where it's a good trickle-down. And the truth is, the policies that we adopt, both as a nation as well as business leaders, they do come from on top. And we have had greater movement in Washington, at least in the executive, for getting a stronger approach to the area of cybersecurity. Thank heavens we do, since we've had the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department, the Education Department, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, CENTCOM, every other agency you can imagine, and the big one, the Office of Personnel Management, which suffered on a government level a breach that is clearly as bad, if not worse, than the breach of Sony. Now, Sony, they got into contracts and email, and 47,000 people had their personal identifying information compromised. With the Office of Personnel Management, over 20 million Social Security numbers, over 19 million investigative reports containing the most intimate details of people's lives they don't want their spouses or their children to know, information they're embarrassed that their doctors know, information that can be used to bribe them and to extort them and to put their lives in jeopardy. Not to mention the fact 5.1 million sets of fingerprints. 5.6 million. So if you're in the intelligence business, you might be able to change your identity, and maybe even you can mess around with your Social Security number. Certainly they do in witness protection. But you sure as heck can't do a heck of a lot with your fingerprints. And somebody has that information. And I don't care who you want to blame. And look, somebody that we have been blaming made an announcement going, this wasn't espionage. This was some criminal element. So what they're really saying is, after we finish using all the information that we have stolen from the Office of Personnel Management, we're then going to give it to a guy down the street who's going to sell it in the black market. And if you think it only impacts employees, former employees, contractors, former contractors, and family and friends, which is horrifying enough, I can give you another example. I was on an airplane a few weeks ago, and I signed some books for the flight attendants. They talk amongst themselves. They're friendly people, a good group to have on your side. And they said, this is coming at a propitious moment. I said, why is that? And they said, because we just got notified that we're on the OPM database. I said, why would you be on the OPM database? And they said, airplane. Anyone gets near an airplane, we have to subject ourselves to these background checks, which are extremely intrusive, very important, but now could be a weapon of individual destruction. So creating this corporate culture, which, by the way, at the Washington level is a little disturbing right now, because see, even with the progress we're making, we're in a political campaign, and all I hear about is the Great Wall of China. I mean, the Great Wall of Mexico. I also hear about the Great Wall of China as well. The Great Wall of Mexico, but what I don't hear is any conversation whatsoever about the concept of a cyber dome, a three-dimensional Great Wall. Now, never really going to happen. We're never going to have perfect security when it comes to cyber. But unless we strive for it, we've got a real problem. And part of the way we strive for it, at least in the private world, is to make people in an organization feel that they own it and they're protecting it. We need to be ready. And this is predicated on a healthy corporate culture that puts security first, so that when the attack comes, the inevitability of that attack is upon us. When it comes, it can be properly contained and managed. Now, in many reports that have been circulated, we've seen the estimated cost of breaches, and it could be anywhere from 3.5 to 3.8 million. Some people say it's a little higher, some people say it's lower because of cyber liability insurance. But now there's a silver lining in all this for everyone in the room. And that's that if you approach data security in a holistic way, you can actually turn it into a moneymaker for your organization. So you're saying, possible? Here's how it works. First of all, the time to change the way businesses approach data security was the day before yesterday, if anyone was wondering. But a framework actually exists to help businesses frame their security and their privacy, and to actually make it a positive marketing point. And this was developed by a friend of mine a while back, who was the former Commissioner of Information and Privacy for Ontario. Her name is Ann Kabukian. I often call her Ann Kevorkian, but then she said, no, you are Dr. Gavin, I'm not. So she created the concept of privacy by design. It's a term of art that actually now is showing up in marketing meetings. A company's approach to privacy and security has got to get figured out in the planning process. This is not something you tack on at the end. So there are 7 principles of privacy and security. By the way, they're in my book, so you don't have to take notes. Number 1, be proactive, not reactive. Do not wait for risks to materialize. And you should focus on eliminating risks associated with storing third-party information, since everybody here in one form or another is storing third-party information. Privacy should be the default setting. Now, perhaps the folks at Samsung should have known this when they came out with their new smart TV that is looking at you, tracking you, listening to you, and they actually have something in their manual that gives you instructions as to how you can disable certain functions. Just think of it also as the location settings on your phone. Disable them. Now, I realize that means that people can't find you in any specific location unless you want them to, but they can text you, and they can call you, and they can email you, depending on how attentive you are to your email. But the key to the development of a product or service is that if a consumer does nothing, their privacy and security should be intact. It's got to be built into the system. And as I mentioned with Samsung and with the Internet of Things, wherever you go now, you're being tracked, your information is being gathered, it's being stored, it's being disseminated, arguably to help manufacturers make better products and services. But if they get hacked, whether it's the heating system in your home, the security system in your home, your baby monitor, your coffee pot, oh, and the newest one, I love this, a mattress cover, a smart mattress cover that knows the particular pressure you like when you go to sleep, and as extra bonuses, it can turn off the lights, turn up the heat, or turn down the heat, and when you get up in the morning, instead of having a 3.5-year-old put his hands in your face saying, Daddy, it's time to get up, the coffee pot goes on, so you have the wonderful aroma of coffee filling the house, the lights go on, the heats go up, that's great. The only problem is, if a bad guy gets hold of that, they now know what you do and when you do it. So, privacy should also be embedded in the design and architecture of your IT systems and your business practices, not a bolt-on. It should also be viewed as a positive-sum game, as opposed to a zero-sum game. So there shouldn't be any false dichotomies. Privacy and security, you should be able to have both. End-to-end security should be embedded into the system before you actually get the first element of information into your system from a third party. And it should extend throughout the entire life cycle of the data. And this, of course, is the whole concept of end-to-end encryption as well, which means you're not only securing it as you get it and as it's in transit, but also when it's no longer time to keep it, that you will destroy it securely and you will destroy it in a timely fashion. Privacy by design also says that you need to tell consumers exactly what you're doing with their information. Security by design, however, requires invisibility, because if you tell people what you're doing with your security, you now put a target on your back. So the most dangerous question anyone can ask you is, have you ever been breached? There is no good answer to this. None. So the last thing, the seventh point, is that you need to have respect for the consumer, which means you always have to keep the interests of individuals uppermost by offering strong privacy defaults, appropriate notice, and empowering user-friendly options. Finally, Facebook. You remember when Zuck said privacy is dead? Well, they've now installed privacy toggles, and they're trying as best they can to give people an idea of how to better protect their information. This whole thing is a culture thing. Can't be lip service. If you can't say it and mean it, don't say it. Because if you say it and leave it, you're going to be in trouble. And you also need to be prepared for a breach and the aftermath of the breach. And if anyone has any questions about if the government is kidding on some of these things, the FTC has taken a very strong position now, including with nonprofits, which is if you have a privacy policy, and take whatever privacy policy you want, it's okay. Like when I was the head of consumer affairs in New Jersey, we said, you can have any refund policy you want, but you better disclose it, you better stand up for it. Well, that's what the FTC is saying. They're saying, if you don't, we're coming after you. Now, where does this leave us? It leaves us in an environment where we realistically have to say, we're going to get breached. Somewhere along the way, we're going to get breached. We can do everything right. Everything right. But unfortunately, there'll be some person, somewhere, in some organization, that didn't get the memo, or got a memo that wasn't the right memo, it was a fake memo, and they click on the wrong link, they provide information somewhere, they make a mistake, and they bring down an organization. And whether it's hundreds of people, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, or millions of people, as we've seen in all of the big breaches, just reflect upon the fact that between Anthem, Primera, Excellus, and the Office of Personal Management, just last year alone, 120 million Social Security numbers were exposed. 120 million. That's like a third of the population. Not to mention, that's just last year with Social Security information. And then with all the other breaches, people go, well, they just got my credit card information. Okay, you make a call, it goes away. Or they'll go, well, all right, they got my name, address, email address, and phone number. That doesn't mean anything. Well, that opens you up to what I lovingly refer to as the pantheons of phishing, ishing, and smishing. And we'll get into those in a couple of minutes. So, the 3 M's for business. Minimize your risk of exposure, monitor, manage the damage. It's nice that we talk about prevention, but the truth is, unfortunately, we're way beyond prevention. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do everything we should to prevent, but the problem is there's so much information out there that bad guys can use to get privileged access to get into systems. It is so easy for them now to masquerade as if they are each and every one of us, that companies have to adjust to that concept when they create security systems. So the real question question is, how do you implement the three M's, not just for you as a consumer, but for a larger group that will inevitably include identity theft victims? And part of the reason why is because you have this lovely band of unwitting co-conspirators known as employees who can make a database possible. Because the truth is, again, doesn't matter how secure you are. One mistake. As a defender, you have to get everything right. As an intruder, they only need to find one moment of vulnerability, and they always find it. Why? Because each and every one of us has a day job, but to an identity thief, a scammer, a hacker, we are their day job. So, an organization needs to ask a certain question. First, is there any security technology we've overlooked? Second, have we invested in enough employee security awareness training? And when we talk about this, you almost have to think about it as training sailors on a nuclear submarine. They train, so when something happens, their response is literally muscle memory. And that's what you have to get in terms of people making sure they don't fall for things they shouldn't. Are we doing the right things to reduce our attack on the surface? Because that's the issue of the world we live in now, is the attack on the surface is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you have any doubts about that, reflect upon the movie Minority Report, where you will go by a billboard, it will scan your retina, and all of your favorite ads will come up. And this is the Internet of Things. And how many things do companies have in their offices, bells and whistles on their system, all of these extra conveniences that actually expand that attacking service? And the last thing on this point is, are we properly monitoring privileged user accounts? Causes of breaches, you know what they are: human error, malicious actors, insufficient awareness training. Who's at fault? Go up, go into the restroom, look in the mirror. All of us. We're all at fault. And as an example, mobile devices. We give you a clue here. Mobile devices were, and will always be considered points of vulnerabilities. Honeyman Institute ran a study a while back of 100 medical institutions. They said, so how many of you guys allow people to bring in their own devices? I said, 88%. Said, how many of you guys are scared to death about allowing your employees to bring in mobile devices? They said, 53%. They said, how many of you are doing anything about it? Only 38%. And this is representative, and these folks are probably even more aggressive than a lot of other people. What are we doing about it? Well, how many organizations allow employees to download unverified personal apps on workplace devices? You know, the same phones and tablets that folks use in order to put on very important customer or fellow employee information. So companies, when we look at this, have to properly fund security efforts, comprehensively train employees, and focus on areas of perceived weaknesses. So, relatively quickly, and then I'll go. Carol's going to start to throw things at me. How do you minimize your risk? Well, the first thing is be proactive. Do not do a workaround. Do a risk assessment. Develop and implement enterprise-wide processes that identify and assess threats, vulnerabilities, attacks, probabilities of occurrence, and outcomes. When you design your systems, always begin with the end in mind, and the end always must be security. Employee security awareness training is as essential as the air we breathe. Let's do that one again. Employee security awareness training is as essential as the air we breathe. Why? First, they're a key defense. Secondly, they're, in most cases, the hacker's first point of attack. Spear phishing, easily decipherable passwords, misplaced cell phones and laptops, improperly secured devices that can access your systems. How do you get this awareness? Comprehensive security training. Ongoing communications with them on security issues. Have them do self-assessments, do audits, do monitoring. You have to layer your security. Multiple layers can slow want to slow thieves down. That's what happens when you miss a tooth here. And it can limit also what they can steal. And there was a recent study done by Palo Alto Networks and Parliament that said that when thieves decide whether or not they're going to attack something, first they plan out how long it's going to take. And if they decide it's going to take too long, you know, there are some guys that go, we don't care. Whatever it takes, we're going to take. You know, there are four kinds of hackers, by the way. State-sponsored, for-profit, cause hackers, and the because I can crowd. Now, some of the because I can folks don't care if it takes forever, just like the recording industry spent a fortune coming up with any privacy software. So proud of it, spent $20, $30, $40 million, announced it. Two guys from Princeton, 21 days, good night. So, layer your security to slow people down. Adopt minimum access, as I love to see in all these movies. Need to know and you don't need to know. Well, need to do. You have access to those things that are appropriate for you to have access to, but you don't have access to anything else. Also, you need to update your access rights in response to changes in personnel. Somebody leaves, you got to do what you got to do to close everything out. And system changes. You bring in new sorts of hardware, software. You got to make sure that everybody's in sync with this. Never permit multiple employees or members of a department to share a password. And by the way, password is not a good password. You should also assign discrete passwords to every person and never allow them to even use a discrete password among various systems. In other words, really isolated so you know exactly who it is, what they're doing, and why. Your system should always be saying, do I know you? And of course, this is all about two-factor authentication. This helps you better protect confidentiality. It also creates accountability, and it verifies a unique identity for each system user. And the beautiful thing about two-factor authentication, it's based on something the user knows, something the user has, and something the user is. Also, segregate your systems. Target learned this the hard way. Financial security and customer employee data separate. They should be segregated from each other, as well as systems and data used for routine operations management. Because sometimes, if those things get combined and someone crawls into one system and they're not properly segregated and they're not properly encrypted, you end up with a 110 million person breach like Target did. Another fun one is CYA if you're going to offer BYOD. And that is if you're going to allow employees to bring devices into your organization, establish stringent security protocols requiring that any device that is allowed access to your systems must meet certain standards before it's allowed to connect to your systems. And if the employees aren't willing to do it, say, no problem, our technology guys will do it. But one way or another, we are going to have security in anything that touches our system. Never underestimate the importance of physical security. Develop proper file retention and destruction policy. This helps you limit your liability, your legal liability, as well as exposure to breaches. So you need to develop appropriate retention requirements for hard copy and for electronic. And then have secure destruction practices for electronic, physical, or obsolete hardware. Only collect what you need and only retain it for as long as you need it or are legally required to keep it. Now, interesting story. Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, became governor of Texas because he was considered an extremely effective attorney general in Texas. What's one of the things he used to do? He would send groups of investigators to go behind gyms, pharmacies, health clubs, spas, law offices, insurance offices, and they would be looking for files that had been just thrown out, not shredded, not properly destroyed. Or we handled the case once with a company, CBS, turned up at their front door. Why? Because they were tipped off to the fact that there were old, disposed of Xerox machines And when they went to look at these machines, they were hard drives, and on the hard drive was a lot of information, employee data. Just like a couple years ago, I did an interview in Washington, D.C. about a fellow bought a typewriter out of, one of these used office equipment sales, takes it home, walks into the room, his 2-year-old is playing with the ribbon. In the old days, the ribbon typewriter. So he picks up the ribbon and he notices there are names, there are social security numbers, there are medical evaluations. So he turns out that a health department in Virginia had been working with the Pentagon after 9/11 and was doing analysis of the health situation for a number of the people that worked in the Pentagon who survived. And unfortunately, all of that stuff was sitting on a ribbon to a typewriter that was accessible by anybody, and luckily was found by someone who was 2. So the other thing is never hesitate to contact an outside consultant. Being Brian is here from IDT 911, he's reliable, he's one of my guys. Certainly always feel free to consult with us. Hey. The second M, monitor your security. Monitor your information security controls. Make sure that the security protocols that you put in place are good enough, robust enough, and updated enough to safeguard your most precious asset, which as far as I'm concerned is the information on your customers and employees, but I'm sure from your perspective, it's also about your trade secrets and your intellectual property. Test them internally or engage a third party. Brian's listening. You also need to know if there's any degradation in this security, because you got to get everything right. Remember again, the bad guy needs 1 point of vulnerability, you got to get it right. So you need to perform vulnerability scans, you've got to do penetration testing, you have to do configuration analysis, because a lot of things, when they are configured improperly, and a hole is opened up that someone can crawl through. And most important, social engineering testing. Forget the fact that we live in a society where everyone has a desperate desire to take every possible piece of the information in their lives and fling it out there for all of the 422,000 people they don't know to share the experience, whether they're birthday wishes, they are, look where I'm going. Remember, when you tell someone where you're going, you're also telling them where you're not. When you don't disable effectively the location device on a camera or phone, you're putting a code, and someone smart reads the code, knows when and where it was taken. So when you go, here's my car, here's my new piece of art, look at this fabulous piece of jewelry that my husband just got me. Or, dude, look at my stereo. Oh, here's my house. Or, better yet, here's my kid. Well, what are you doing? You're telling a burglar what it is, where it is, who it is, and what kind of vehicle they need to haul it off. But this is part of it. So this is why, with companies, we all know, despite whatever you say to your employees, they're going on those social networking sites. And they're going to provide information in those sites. Look at my workplace. Here's my computer. Oh, I am working on something top secret, but here's my computer. Perfect example of why you need training. I trust you've all heard of the CEO wire scam, where the financial department gets an email they think is from the CEO. It's late in the day. It's telling them to wire money to a bank they never heard of, but the CEO says this is critical to our existence as an organization. This money has to get wired before the end of the day. And half the people who work are terrified to pick up the phone and call the CEO and go, did your office just send this to me? So they wire the money. One company in particular, a public company, which will go nameless, wired $46 million that they're never getting back. Then there's the new one. I was in the office of a rather significant New York City publication a few days ago. They asked me to come in and speak to all the senior writers and editors that someone in the HR department received an email, again, from who they thought was the CEO, asking them for the backup information on the W-2 forms, which they promptly provided. And 375 hysterical people were sitting in front of me and I couldn't resist. I had to give them the McDeer story from the firm, but then I talked to them about the things they need to do. You also need to monitor for intrusion. If you see something, as we say here in the East, say something. You need to notify, if it's a digital intrusion, your security personnel, your IT personnel. If it's a physical intrusion, your security personnel. Also, you need to manage an information program, which means you need to delegate authority to somebody with the right skills and proven talents. And then give them runway, or as Lamani, who's my PR director, says, my lane, give them a lane to do what they need to do. Now, call it whatever you want. Compliance officer, information security officer, CISO. You can call them an olive if it makes you feel better, but whatever it is, the key is you've got to centralize responsibility for managing data security. Being secure is a daily responsibility. Just because you got it right yesterday doesn't mean that it's going to stay right tomorrow, because every minute the bad guys are developing and developing and developing, because again, we are their day job. There's a whole lot of money involved in it. If you can't afford to have a centralized unit or individual, then there are companies out there, third-party organizations, where you can get a fractional CISO, or you can get a virtual Chief Information Security Officer. So it's like you put on your headset, you talk to your CISO. It's an important thing. Establish a patch management program. Oh, those patches. But you need it. And it's got to be overseen by somebody who's responsible, who provides you with periodic reports and monitors and installs security updates. This is the other thing that came out of Sony, is that no one ever spent time reporting to the C-suite or the board of directors, which, by the way, are increasingly becoming targets for shareholder derivative suits when something goes wrong. Here's a biggie. It's a biggie in the healthcare area. It is evolving into every area, and that is you are your vendor. So therefore, when you do a contract with a vendor or a service provider, think of them as if you were your employees, because I promise you, the regulators and the class action attorneys sure do. So always read the fine print. Key thing is find out where their responsibilities end and your responsibilities start. And you should contractually demand data